Today we're going to continue our series on the history of Charlemagne by covering the founding of the Carolingian Empire and how the empire's governmental structure developed and changed during Charlemagne's reign. I'm Quill history, and in this video we will start at the turn of the 9th century. Stay tuned! During the end of the 8th century, Charlemagne had successfully expanded the Frankish kingdom to encompass most of Western and Central Europe, as well as establishing treaties with nearby powers and secure marches against his enemies in the southeast and the southwest. The decades of war that had characterized Charlemagne's reign was starting to die down. At the same time as this was happening, Charlemagne was visited by Pope Leo III, who appeared before him asking for help. Down in Rome, the state of the church had become disrupted by infighting between different groups in the papacy. Several churchmen had accused the Pope for corruption and morally detestable behavior, and the situation had become so heated that in year 799, Roman partisans loyal to the late Pope Adrian I attacked Leo, who was forced to flee the city. Charlemagne agreed to aid the Pope, and in November of year 800, he marched south with an entourage of soldiers and restored Leo to the office of Pope. He then stayed in Rome during the winter, which was a decision that would have important consequences, not only for Charlemagne, but for the history of Europe as well. On Christmas Day the 25th, 800, while attending Mass in the Church of St. Peter, Charlemagne kneeled before the church altar and prayed. While doing this, the recently reinstated Pope Leo put a crown upon his head, declaring him Imperator Romanum, Emperor of the Romans. By doing this, the Pope defied the Byzantine Emperor's claim to rule the lands in the former empire in Western Europe, as well as arrogate the right to appoint the Emperor of the Romans. Charlemagne accepted the title, but whether he did so willingly or unwillingly is disputed among scholars. Some have pointed to early sources like Charlemagne's biographer Einhard, who claimed that Charlemagne was not aware of the Pope's plan to crown him emperor, and that being bestowed the title of emperor was something he disliked a lot. Einhard also claimed that had Charlemagne known of the Pope's plans, he would never have set foot in the Church of St. Peter on that Christmas morning. Other scholars, however, have argued that Charlemagne was indeed aware of the coronation and point to the fact that Charlemagne certainly could not have missed the bejeweled crown waiting on the altar when he came to pray. Whatever Charlemagne thought of this, the title of emperor would remain during the rest of Charlemagne's reign and be passed down to his successor, who would rule the empire intact. Despite Charlemagne likely having initially planned to divide his realm into smaller kingdoms among his sons, only one of his heirs remained alive when he lay on his deathbed. At the time of his death, Charlemagne had appointed his 3 sons, Louis, Carloman, later renamed Pepin of Italy, and Charles the Younger as regents of their own respective domains. However, before the empire could be divided, both Pepin and Charles had died, leaving King Louis as the only legitimate heir to the Carolingian Empire. In 813, Charlemagne called Louis to his court, where he crowned him co-emperor. Louis then quickly returned to Aquitaine as Charlemagne spent the autumn hunting and the winter in his palace in Aachen, where he fell ill. Then in early January of 814, the king of the Franks and emperor of Rome passed away, leaving his realm to King Louis. When Louis got word of his father's death, he hurried to Aachen and proclaimed himself emperor with the unanimous support of the Frankish aristocracy. Upon his death, Charlemagne had for several decades built and expanded upon the achievements of his fathers and his Merovingian predecessors. Not only had the Frankish kingdom considerably expanded on several fronts, but Charlemagne had also made several innovations to the kingdom and later empire's administrations. During his reign, Charlemagne started to make new use of the traditional Frankish annual assemblies by expanding its function by turning it into a tool to cement the king's personal ties with his subjects. In addition to this, he also required always free subjects to swear loyalty to him, and he established personal ties with powerful figures by accepting them as royal vassals in return for benefits in the form of offices and land grants to be exploited for their personal benefits, as long as they remained loyal to the king. To better be able to enforce his rule on the local levels, Charlemagne integrated the central and local administrations by regularizing and expanding the use of royal agents, charged with making regular circuits through assigned territories to announce the king's will, gather information of the performance of local officials, and to correct abuses. This greatly expanded the use of written documents and thus the need for literacy. Luckily, literacy was on the rise in Francia as a result of the educational program which Charlemagne had created to improve clerical literacy in an intellectual and cultural blossoming called the Carolingian Renaissance, which I have covered in more detail in my video on the history of science and philosophy in the early Middle Ages. One of the last innovations that was gradually introduced during the reign of Charlemagne was a grafting of a religious component onto the traditional and somewhat narrow conception of the basis of royal authority in early medieval Europe. Drawing on the Old Testament and the writings of St. Augustine, the Frankish kingship progressively started to see the king's position as bestowed for the purpose of realizing a divine plan for humanity and the universe. This new role entailed a vast expansion of traditional royal authority and a redefinition of the priorities that royal government should serve. Today I hope you learned something new about Charlemagne and the history of Francia. Don't forget that if you like this video and want to see more videos like it, hit the like, share and subscribe buttons.